Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I am Ivy the Occultist, and today I am joined by Sanhre, who is the creator of the Order of Chaos podcast, which you can find on YouTube and Spotify. I'll have all of his information linked below in the description box. But Sanhre, welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much. I'm so stoked to be here.
Yeah, I'm stoked to have a conversation with you because, well, if some of you don't know, I was just on his podcast, and I'll link that episode down below as well. But it's not often that I get to have conversations with fellow chaos magicians. I feel like we're so few and far in between. So I'm excited to have some conversations today and get into the nitty-gritty of what chaos magic actually is. And chaos magicians don't typically agree with each other from what I've found so far. So I'm excited to debate a little bit and disagree if we do. But let's just get started. So I wanted to ask you, how would you personally define chaos magic? So for people who have absolutely no idea what we're talking about, let's define chaos magic first.
Okay. So that's difficult, as you just stated, to define chaos magic. And again, I'm involved in a correspondence with Peter J. Carroll right now, and I still find that there's a lot of dissonance between the two of us about what exactly chaos magic is. But let's say we're going to boil it down to like its fundamentals. I would say that what chaos magic is, in its purest, most simplest form, is the search for the underlying metaphysical structure that pre-exists religious and spiritual and magical systems of which we have created symbols and rules and rituals and protocols around. Chaos magic is, to say what chaos magic is would be like asking what language is. It's making sounds with your mouth. That's what it is.
Yes.
But it becomes something much more when there's an agreement between other people about language. And in terms of chaos magic, when there's an agreement between the practitioner and the metaphysical realm, and that agreement can be fluctuating, right? That's another part of what chaos magic is that we use belief as a tool. We don't necessarily adhere to one magical system. We can bounce between them with the understanding that there is some sort of underlying metaphysical reality.
Yes, I love that answer. That is so different from my answer, but I think I still agree with you on a lot of what you said. I actually had to write mine down because I wanted to make sure that I had a very type A personality over here, people. So I wrote that chaos magic is a meta model of magic, and it's a psychological approach of practicing magic that involves using belief as a tool for manifestation, as you said, deconditioning your mind, and the avoidance of dogmatism, which is kind of what you already mentioned. You know, we're really using belief as a tool. And for example, with deity work, it's not necessarily like we believe that there are these gods and goddesses sitting up in the clouds looking down on us. What we do believe is the belief in those gods and goddesses are what make them real, not necessarily that they are real without the belief. It's the belief part that makes it real. And so the belief in every religion that we see across time and space, all of those are real because of the belief in those religions. And therefore, none of them are technically real because none of them are a universal law if all of them are existing in one sphere at the same time. So I think the avoidance of dogmatism for me is the biggest component that makes chaos magic, if I had to say. And then, of course, you know, using belief as a tool and paradigm jumping and all of those things. So going beyond that, then I wanted to talk kind of about some of the techniques maybe that chaos magicians use, because when we try to define chaos magic, I feel like it's so confusing for beginners, and they're like, okay, but what do you actually do? What does that mean? I'm not really sure. So, if I could just ask you, what are some of your favorite techniques that maybe you would consider part of chaos magic, which is so hard to define because, well, I'll just let you take it from there.
Well, I think that the most common chaos magic practice that most people who are involved in chaos magic or just aware of it would the go-to would be sigil magic. Now, for me, sigil magic has evolved from traditional sigil making, which you can find the process for in Liber Null, and that's what I would call traditional. Not that chaos magic has a lot of traditions, but I would call that traditional sigil making. And for me, that has evolved into runes and bind runes, and I've gotten away from the more traditional sigils because I find that runes have a more projectile energy. which I appreciate and works well for me. So if you follow me on TikTok, then you'll see that almost all of my TikToks are just me doing the same magic ritual over and over again, which is a rune with a specific purpose, with a drop of blood on it burned on this altar back here. And that's really my go-to method, right? And I don't do a lot of complicated ceremonial magic. I don't do I'm very lazy. I'm a double Leo, and I'm super duper lazy, and so I just do what's simple and effective. But that right there is also a part of what chaos magic is to me. It's finding things that are simple and effective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with sigils, of course. I feel like sigils, that's probably the number one technique that people go down when they start chaos magic. And I love sigils. They're so quick and easy. They're so efficient. I think I want to throw in servitors as well, just because I work with a ton of servitors. Well, I have two long-standing servitors that I work with now. And for anybody that's listening, servitors are magical entities that are created by the practitioner. And they're kind of like thought forms. And it's part of the whole psychological model, which I feel like really kind of flows with chaos magic. And I find that for me, a lot of astral work is a part of my chaos magic journey. Although I know I could probably call that hedge witchery or whatever. There's a million different names for it. But the way that I do astral work and the world building that I do inside my mind, to me, feels very chaos magic, because it's, again, operating kind of in that psychological model and creating different worlds and dimensions that you can flow through. So I think that would be another technique for sure. But I think just the techniques it can be anything, because you're paradigm jumping. You're jumping from one system to another system, and you're trying a bunch of different things and seeing what works. But let's talk a little bit more about our personal practices. So I kind of wanted to ask you, everyone on this channel is probably already familiar with my journey into chaos magic, but how did you get into chaos magic? What was your journey?
Okay. So long story short, shortly after my father passed away, I tried going to church, and that didn't work out. Yeah, my father was a very devout atheist. And when I explained that to the church people, they said, well, sucks for him, essentially. He didn't go to the good place. And this was also like a terrible church with a terrible priest. And I'm not saying that that's how it all is, but that was my experience. I was like 13 years old. So I got mad about it, and I went out and bought a copy of the Satanic Bible. And that actually really changed my life. And it's still to this day a book that I recommend everybody who's interested in magic read. Now you have to take some of it with a grain of salt. There's a good amount of angry teenage angst in there, which is why it was appealing to me when I was 13, 14 years old. But I don't follow that book to the letter anymore, but I do feel that it gives an extremely effective description of how magic works without any bullcrap. And it made sense to me. It made perfect sense. And I started doing magic right then and there, and I never stopped. And I kind of had always just done chaos magic. I just didn't know it was called chaos magic till 20 years later. Because I never adhere to anything. I'm so ADHD, and I'm so lazy. I'm not going to get a bell and a this and a that and a do the thing. I'm not going to do that. But what I did understand was that when you set an intention and you're focused on it, and you have a desire for something to happen, and you put that psychic energy into the ether, that you will get results back. And I understood that because I did it over and over again, and it worked over and over again.
I like how you said, it's so funny, because I think that you and I probably practice chaos magic very similarly, but I feel like our perspectives on it are slightly different, in that you say that you are, double Leo, you've got the lazy lion vibes, and you you really don't want to have to put a lot of effort in something. So you're looking for something that's, the most efficient way possible. And I agree with that. However, for me, I tend to be more of a very type A, rigid type person. And I like things to be very technical. I like it to be A, B, C, D, so I like the options that chaos magic gives me. And for me to be able to categorize those options in a sick organizational way, I don't know. So I think it's interesting that you approach it from more of the casual approach. I feel like most people would probably do that are drawn to chaos magic.
Well, part of that for me is that I am extraordinarily busy. I have a full-time job completely outside of magic and my podcast. I have a full-time job, a little bit more than full-time, and I own a company, and I have a son, and I'm a single dad. And I do not have time, right? And this is something I hear from a lot of people. I really want to do magic, but I don't have time. Yes, you do. You do. If I do, you do. Trust me. 3 jobs. I have 3 jobs and a kid. and I can do this. You can too.
That's true. That's a really, really good point. I don't have kids, so I can't sympathize with that, but I can only imagine how tough that is. Okay, so let's get into like kind of a spicy question that I had for you, because this is something that I always try not to judge other people's practices because it's not my place to say what chaos magic is and isn't to someone else, because we're also very different. However, I have had some issues lately when I look at certain practices. I, let me just ask you the question. I wrote it down here. What are your thoughts on occultists that adopt some of the chaos magic techniques, but don't necessarily do paradigm jumping? So let's say they are using belief as a tool to some degree in their magical practice. They're using random spell ingredients in their spell work, but they're not paradigm jumping. They are a Norse pagan forever, or they are an atheist forever, or you get the point. They're not really jumping. They're not doing the avoidance of dogmatism, so to speak. Do you feel like that's true chaos magic?
I feel like at its core, it couldn't be defined as anything but chaos magic, but it's not what chaos magic was intended to be by its creator. Now, here's how I kind of view that. And we did this on our last talk too. And I apologize to everyone out there who doesn't work in the construction industry. This is just how I think because
Okay.
I've been doing this for so long. But I work at a design build firm. Okay. And what design build is that we don't just do drywall. We don't just do this or that. We do everything. We do all of it. We design your renovation and then we build it. And this is how the masons and the master builders who built ancient Rome did things. They weren't just one guy doing one job. There was somebody who had a grander vision, right? And then after that, it separated out and sort of people started to specialize in individual trades instead of being somebody who did it all. And that I do feel had a detrimental effect on the way we build things. Look at the world now compared to the ancient world. Our architecture is garbage compared to theirs. But it's still just the natural way things tend to go and the way people tend to focus in on one thing. Believe it or not, and this is hard for me to believe, but there are people out there who don't have ADHD. I can't even comprehend that. I have no idea what it would be like to be able to focus on one thing for more than 30 seconds, but I can't do it. So for me, paradigm jumping in the beginning was like, oh, thank God, because my brain's gonna do this anyway, right? I can't help it. But now I use it in a very, after 20 years, I use it in a very like strategic way. And that's very, very beneficial to me. However, if you're out there practicing a specific magical craft with the belief that it is your belief in that craft that makes it effective, I would have to define that as chaos magic. At least in
Wow.
a way, it's chaos-ish.
Hmm. I think I disagree. I see what you're saying here, but I don't think I could classify that as a true chaos magic practice. I think the avoidance of dogmatism and the paradigm jumping is so essential. I think that trying to achieve ego death is essential. And for anybody that's listening and not familiar, ego death, your ego is basically made up of all the things you like, the things that you don't like. It's your personality, it's who you are in the world. It helps shape how you perceive the world. And that can be a sense of security, but it's also a false sense of security because it's very limiting. And sometimes you can't see things that you don't typically believe in because your ego is going to filter that stuff out. So you need to attempt to achieve ego death. And I don't personally believe that ego death is actually attainable for most of us. I really don't. I think the ego is very necessary for us to sustain life. But I think it's important to at least attempt to achieve ego death, to check your perceptions. Like if you are an atheist, true and true, you're an atheist forever, you are limiting yourself by not being able to work with certain gods or goddesses that could really help your practice because your ego is telling you that they're not real. And I feel like chaos magic at its core is not giving into any sort of dogmatism, whether it's the belief in gods or the no belief in gods. And so you might be potentially limiting yourself from a really efficient way of practicing magic, all because your ego says, oh no, gods aren't real. I refuse to work with gods because I don't believe that they're real. And, same goes the other way around. So I think that people that are practicing in that fashion, not paradigm jumping, not deconditioning their mind, not working towards ego death, I would not classify as true chaos magic. I would say that they're adding chaos into their magical practice and they're using belief as a tool, sure. But just because you adopt certain techniques of chaos magic doesn't mean that you're actually practicing the philosophies of chaos magic, is kind of where I'm getting at. I think a lot of people just kind of cherry pick and choose a couple little things, but then don't want to adopt the whole philosophy of the avoidance of dogmatism. And then I'm kind of like, well, you're not really doing chaos magic then. You're just kind of doing whatever you want. But then again, chaos magic is kind of about doing whatever you want. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
there's a built-in conundrum there. Okay.
Mhm.
And it's that if you believe that it is your beliefs that fuel your magic and that there is not an objective truth to what you're doing, then that is an avoidance of dogmatism. Dogmatism would be when you buy into the objective truth of the Norse gods or the Hindu gods or the blah blah blah, the flying spaghetti monster. Like, it doesn't matter, right? When you see that as an objective truth, now you've bought into dogmatism. But if you understand that this is a psychological approach and you just strongly prefer that aesthetic for whatever reason, I still feel like you're adhering, like you said, like you're adding chaos magic in. You're not a strict diehard chaos magician, but here's the thing about that, right? The concept of chaos magic is the avoidance of dogmatism, and that includes the dogmatism of chaos magic, in my opinion, right? Because we don't want to fall into that dogmatism either, right? Which is that you have to do it this way. So there's a built-in conundrum there, right? And that's where the term chaos becomes really applicable. It's chaos magic, right? Now, what chaos magic isn't, and what bothers me, again, not trying to judge anybody, but like we talked about before with the flaming hot Cheetos, like when you're just like doing random stuff because it looks cool. I mean, even that can be an effective way of doing magic, but it bugs me. Okay. I do think that putting real work and effort and intention into your magic is what makes all magic work, right? And as long as you're doing that, then maybe the labels aren't so important, but yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of sort of built-in contradictions when it comes to chaos magic.
That's why this question is so hard. It's
It
hard.
is.
You can't define it because it puts a limit on it, and the whole point is that chaos magic is limitless. But yeah, with the flaming hot Cheeto comment, I feel like people who are putting just random ingredients into spell work, I feel like that's more Discordianism. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I feel like that's just being chaotic, and not really. I feel like chaos magic has its own philosophies, of course, but yeah, it's hard for me to say. I think I stick by my own beliefs. I don't think it's true chaos magic. And when I think about my personal practice and how eclectic it is, the way that I cast a circle, and I don't cast a circle every single time I do a ritual, but sometimes I do. And the way that I cast a circle is very Wiccan. I mean, it's very influenced by the Wiccan practice, even though I'm not Wiccan. And so just because I'm casting a circle in a Wiccan fashion, does that mean I'm Wiccan? No. And so I feel like people who are using belief as a tool and getting kind of random and chaotic in their practice, sure, they're adopting some of those techniques from chaos magic. Does that actually make them chaos magicians? Not necessarily, no. So I don't know. I think that you need the philosophies behind it, but maybe that's because I'm too rigid. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think it's a very valid point, right? And I think that you're more in alignment with Peter J. Carroll than I am, right? And that there's, for example, Peter does not believe in astrology at all. Like, and I believe that astrology is an algorithmic, demonstrable, objective truth. That's what I believe, right? But if I were to try to define chaos magic in a simple sentence, Liber Null says nothing is true, everything is permitted. I would say that's correct, but here's how I would phrase it: your experience of reality will conform to your beliefs about it.
Mm, yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, after our last conversation on your podcast, I kind of found that I feel like I'm somewhere between you and Peter Carroll. Like I'm right between you two. I
Yeah.
agree and disagree with both of you. So, and I mean, that's just very chaos magician anyways. But let's pivot and talk. I want to talk a little bit more about your personal practice. I want to get into the nitty-gritty. So, what kind of magical entities are you working with right now? Who have you worked with in the past? What has your experience been paradigm jumping, I guess, so to speak, and who you've been working with?
All right. So that brings up another source of great contention between myself and guests on my show and just magicians in general about the objective truth of entities. So I have worked with many entities over my time, and in the beginning of my magical practice, I did want to view them as more like of objective reality. So I began working with Lucifer. Then it was just Lucifer for the longest time, and I took the Satanic Bible pretty seriously, and I viewed him even then as like a symbol more than a living entity, I guess. It's hard for me to view the gods as like anthropomorphic beings. That doesn't seem quite right to me. That has always seemed like a symbol. Like that's a symbol. It's not a anyways. So I did that for about 15 years. And then I had a really powerful spiritual awakening experience, which again is like not necessarily a part of chaos magic, but it happened to me. Right. And I had a long introduction to my spirit guides, and I began working with Egyptian deities. Now, I've been obsessed with ancient Egypt since I was a little kid. And there are weird things like, but my first real like occult experience was sitting on top of the pyramid at Teotihuacan with my dad when I was like 10 years old.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Back when you were allowed to go up there. Yeah. And I've been obsessed with pyramids my whole life. And so I started working with the Egyptian deities, not because I chose them, but because they presented themselves to me. Right. And it was Thoth. And so I worked with Thoth for many years. And then Thoth one day, no, sorry. Let me backtrack. Then after that, I started working with Sumerian deities, and this was through study. This was through my research and study, and this was a choice that I made. So I worked with Sumerian deities for a while and studied that. And then I was deep in a trance meditation one day, and I had this sort of feeling of Thoth like picking me up and dropping me off in front of Odin, and said, "Just stay here." And I didn't want to. It didn't feel like the right place for me. So I fought it for 2 years and had like an existential crisis until I finally gave in and then started with working with the Norse gods. And that's where I'm at now.
Which, do you work with all the Norse gods, or is there particular gods?
Odin, Thor, Loki, Frey, and Freya. I keep it to the kind of the core set. I will invoke Tyr on certain occasions if I feel that it's necessary, especially for protection magic. But if I'm going to read tarot or do a spell, I'm going to invoke Odin, Thor, Loki, Frey, and Freya.
Okay, interesting. That's a lot. For me, that's a lot. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of gods and goddesses to work with. Interesting. So how does that look like for you? Do you give them offerings on a regular basis, or is it just kind of like you use them when you need them? And how do you work with them in ritual? What does that look like?
So the vast majority of my magical practice happens through the tarot. Right, I am a tarot reader more than anything else. I am a tarot reader. So I have a large collection of decks over here, and each one has a particular spirit attachment to it that was chosen not by me but by the spirit. And so, very fittingly, my Murder of Crows deck is how I talk to Odin, and this is how I get the clearest messages currently. Prior to that, when I was working more with Thoth, then it would be the Deviant Moon deck. If I want to talk to my dad, it's the Alchemical Tarot. And I have, so on and so forth. I have dozens of tarot decks, each with particular spirit attachments. And so that's how I do most of my conversational work with the deities. If I have a question, I just go right to the tarot. When it comes to spell work, I do it exactly as you see on my TikToks. That's me doing a spell. That's the whole thing, except for what's going on in my mind, right? And if you want to understand that, then you need to read like 100 books. Or just understand metaphysics, read Liber Null, like have a strong understanding of the mental process that goes into spell work. But as far as the physical process goes, you can see the whole thing on my TikTok. That's it.
I love it.
It's the creation of a Bind rune, the putting a drop of blood on it. And by the way, for blood magic, I use this set. This is made by my friend Lauren, who owns Sui Generis Magica. It is a ritual bloodletting kit. It comes with it comes with nice hypodermic needles and a scalpel and like sanitizers and everything you need.
That's amazing.
I'm not just stabbing myself with a rusty knife like some old school magicians do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have a little finger pricker that I use for my blood magic. And it's so funny. Once you stop doing blood magic for a while and you start doing it again, I get like the shakes where I'm like, oh, I can do it. I can do it. Anyways, I don't know why I'm talking about that, but
No,
um,
totally. I'm such a wuss. Like, and I get comments about this too, and people on my TikToks who's like, "Yeah, just use a knife." I'm like, "No,
no,
I'm in danger of like injuring myself at work all the time. I'm not going to do it at home too. I'm going to use a nice, clean little needle and put a drop of blood on there. And like, I don't think it makes you any more like badass or whatever if you use like a giant, you know, what's the name of virtual dagger? I can't remember all of a sudden. Um, Athame?
oh, yes, the
Yeah.
knife that slices. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, I definitely can't do that. I feel like the almost the more pain that you're in, the bigger the sacrifice in my sick, twisted mind. I'm like, oh, well, if I'm shaking and fearing this little finger prick or whatever, that's an even bigger offering to whatever God I'm working with because I'm triumphing over my own fear in order to give this blood to them for this working or whatever. So anyways, well, that's interesting. And you don't work with you do not work with servitors or tulpas or any sort of magical entities other than gods and goddesses, correct?
I don't have the time. I would love to. I would love to dive, and I will. I will dive into that at some point. But currently, I don't have the time. I do have a servitor of sorts that doesn't have a name because something I've been doing for a very long time is making myself an astral to-do list
Mm.
and just allowing whatever part of me chooses to do those things in the astral realm to go ahead and do it. And I just allow space for it, but I have not created a servitor with a proper name with whom I have a deep relationship.
That's fair. I think my practice with servitors is a little different than the textbook as well, because I have a video on how to create a servitor for anybody interested. And it's a step by step how to sit down and actually write it out, create the name, and go through the sigil activation and all of that. And then when I look at my own magical practice now, after all these years, I'm like, do I do most of those steps? Probably not. I really just create some sort of a name and then the energy slowly builds over a long period of time and then it eventually becomes this own thought form. It's like making a little snowball. It gets bigger and bigger each day
Mm.
that I spend time with it, and then it becomes this thing that now has its own voice in my head, which sounds creepy, but it's actually really empowering. It's really cool to work with.
No, okay, no, you just hit on something that I want to talk about for a
Mhm.
moment because I think every sane person has voices in their head. Okay. Insanity is trying to block out and ignore the voices in your head. A rational, sane approach would be to distinguish between them and give them names, which is, in my opinion, how all pantheons are created in the first place. Is by distinguishing between the various voices in your head, because there are several. Like if you're not, I don't believe in this whole background people NPC bullshit. I think it's extremely narcissistic. I do think
I
it's
agree.
interesting that some people don't have an inner dialogue. I cannot fathom what that would be like because mine never shuts up,
Same.
right? But I do work really hard at organizing it and having a positive relationship with the various voices in my head. I know which one is my ego. I know which one is my higher mind. I know which one is my subconscious, mostly, even though it's several. We can get into that. That's a whole other thing, right? But I can distinguish between what part of me these thoughts are coming from, and I know which voices to listen to and which ones are like, okay, this is coming from a place of fear or ego, or this is coming from a place of truth, or this is coming from a place of wanting to do the right thing, right? And it's very important to discern between those voices. I mean, especially for a magician. I think it's important for every living human being, but especially for magicians.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I've even explained servitors as gremlins inside my mind because I feel like the subconscious mind is so complex and we have all of these different energies running around at any given moment. I also believe that our subconscious mind is a portal that leads to other portals, and that energy is just kind of filtering in and out depending on the day. And so you have all these different voices. By the way, I cannot fathom either how some people don't have an internal dialogue or don't have voices in their head. For me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds so peaceful. But
Well, they must think in pictures in a way that, because I
yeah.
struggle with visualization. It's difficult for me. So I
Oh,
imagine it's just a whole different way of thinking that's more visual, or more. I guess visual would be the only other option if it's not
yeah.
auditory.
You just wow. I'm wondering now, because I think in pictures, and visualization is something that's always come so easily to me. It's my thing. Like, I mean, it feels almost as real in my head as it does in this external environment. And sometimes I've actually personally had issues where the lines get blurred. And I've had, especially when I was lucid dreaming a lot, I was having a hard time distinguishing what was real and what was not. So it was all just very, very real to me. But now I'm wondering, do I have an internal dialogue, or is it more pictures? Because for me, it is more pictures. But yeah, I don't know. That's interesting.
For me, it's a straight voice with whom I can have conversations.
Oh, I don't have that. I do not have
Yeah,
that.
see, everyone's different.
Weird.
Everybody's different. Yeah.
I always thought I was the one with the internal dialogue, and turns out I'm not. I don't know. But yeah, the servitors are really just assigning those voices in your head. Although I will say, so I don't normally hear voices. It's like I'm thinking thoughts, but when I'm in a deep meditation and I'm working with one of my servitors, there was a moment when we talked about this kind of briefly on the podcast that I was on with you, but it was this weird moment where I heard a deep hello in my head that did not come from me whatsoever. It was, and I mean, I wasn't on drugs or anything. This was a totally sober experience. And it was crazy because that was the moment where my servitor's voice was developed and it actually said hello. And it doesn't happen very often, but there are times where I can hear its voice and it's not mine. I mean, I can say 100% it's not my voice, and it's not something that I can anticipate either. It's not like I'm making up these words in my head. They're coming without me anticipating them. Maybe it's my subconscious. I don't know. But it's interesting for sure how they can take shape.
It is. When I was working with the Sumerian gods, they were very loud. They were very loud and they wanted to talk. And they would give, I had such intense auditory hallucinations that it scared me.
Wow.
And it was very difficult. I got through it and it was an incredible experience. And I have also had really deep visual experiences, but only while under a state of semi-hypnosis through meditation. I mean, it takes a lot of work for me. But this is one of the things that sort of contradicts the chaos magic model to me, and why my approach is that I believe in essentially all the gods and all the entities. I believe in them as being real, but also a part of the self, and I reconcile that through the Hermetic principle of correspondence: as above, so below; as within, so without. Because the Sumerian gods are loud and want to talk, and they want to talk to me about magic. I was given I guess I'd call it a mantra in the Sumerian language, which I have yet to figure out what it means.
Wow.
So that's something that's a mystery for me that I'm still working on. I was told a lot of things. I was given a tremendous amount of information that greatly accelerated my practice. But when it comes to working with the Norse gods, they don't do that. With the Norse gods, it's a feeling. It's a pressure feeling to do certain things and act upon certain things, right? Now, when it comes to the goetic spirits, and if for everybody who's like a long time fan of this show, I wonder if I even have any of those, but on my show anyways. And it seems like anytime I start talking about the Goetia on my podcast, the lights go off. Or the guests' lights go off or something. The first podcast I did with Travis McHenry, who created the this occult tarot deck, which is a Goetic tarot deck, the day that I was talking to him to confirm the podcast appointment, my fire alarm went off.
Oh, wow.
And it happened again the next day while I was talking to him. So the Goetic spirits are tricksters and they do trickster shit. The Sumerian gods are loud and vocal and do loud vocal shit. The Norse gods like to hang back. They have very different energies that are not the same thing, just with different names.
Okay, so you just brought up something that I really wanted to talk about, and I'm glad that you said that, because so when I work with deities, whatever deity it is, I typically work with them through tarot like you do with communication, but there are rituals that I do where I bring them into my body. So I go into a meditation or visualization where I kind of visualize them behind me walking up towards and entering my body, and then at that point I become that god. So my body position may change, my voice may change, I am the embodiment of that archetypal energy or that frequency or whatever it is that we're calling gods and goddesses. And so, from that perspective, I totally agree with you. Every god or even every pantheon feels a little bit different and they communicate a little bit differently. So, I'm just curious if you have any experiences. Do you do that as well? Or am I the only weirdo that brings gods into their body?
I mean, that's invocation. That's
Yeah.
invocation work. That's a important part of magic since the very beginning. I don't do a tremendous amount of it, which is why I won't be teaching that part of the mystery school course. My friend Lucas will be teaching it because he is more of an expert in that subject than I am. Again, this is something I don't have a tremendous amount of time for. It's not that I don't want to, not that I don't intend to dive into that. I'm excited for Lucas's class, but it's not currently a big part of my practice. Partly because I'm scared. Also, it's a scary thing to do because you're essentially opening yourself up to possession. And okay, let me say it this way: I've witnessed possession twice, and it is terrifying. It is every bit as scary as the movies, and I have felt it for a brief moment, which is why I will not, under any circumstances, touch a Ouija board.
Mm. Well, yeah. Don't even get me started on Ouija boards because I have a whole rant that I would go down on that. But I totally understand what you mean because it can be really scary. And I think my first time was by accident, really. And then and then I was kind of like, well, I've already done it once, so I might as well do it again and see what
That's
happens. And
extremely brave of you.
well, I don't know. I don't do any drugs, so I gotta get some sort of, I don't know, excitement out of my life somehow. So God's it is.
Well,
But
drugs are bad for one thing. I mean, I will use mushrooms once or twice a year, maybe up to 3 times a year, with the intention of having a spiritual experience. But it's a scary thing for me to do. And I've historically been a marijuana user, but I've been cutting way back recently, and just getting to the point where I'm kind of like, eh.
yeah, I feel like that's pretty common in the spiritual community to either use marijuana or mushrooms, some sort of natural plant from the earth that makes you have a spiritual experience. So
Potions.
potions,
It's
yeah.
potions, you know. When I do mushrooms, I make tea with moon water that I made the previous month, and I put other correspondences in it to elicit a specific experience. It's making potions. Now with pot, it's not, you know, you're just kind of smoking pot, but I mean Gandalf smoked pot.
Right. This is true. So you brought up your school. So let's talk about that a little bit because I'm super excited for what you have set up. And I wish this was something that was available when I was a beginner or even an intermediate, because I feel like it would have changed my magical practice and made me be so much more efficient a lot quicker. So let's talk about your mystery school and everything that you're offering.
Yeah, sure. So that is the point, is to give people a fast track, because 20 years is a long time to sift through the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of occult books that are available with contradicting information. So I have taken the MMA approach to magic, which is that I take what works and I leave what does not. And I've taken everything that I know and put it into a 2-year-long course. It's something you could do for 2 years, or you could do, like, the first class will be on the Hermetic principles. You just want to do that one, that's fine. You sign up through Patreon, you pay monthly. Each of the courses is approximately 4 to 6 weeks long, and we're going to do 90 minutes every Wednesday, along with also a book club that's optional. And everybody who joins the school also gets a free 15-minute tarot reading with me every month. And we're going to go through essentially everything that I know. I'm going to teach you everything that I know about magic in the most articulate and thorough way that I can. I've organized it in the most reasonable way that I can. I might change a thing or two, but we will cover the Hermetic principles, astrology, numerology, spirit work, spell casting, all the different types of spell casting, advanced spell casting, ritual techniques, um, the psychological model, the scientific model, the spirit model, the chaos model, every approach you could possibly take. And I've designed it in a way that it doesn't matter to me what path you're on. You could join this school if you're a Wiccan and you will learn a ton. You could join this school as a Christian and you will learn a ton. You could join this school as a somewhat believer and you will learn a ton. It doesn't matter, right? I just want to teach the things that are, to me, demonstrably true. It, again, conflicts with sort of the chaos magic model, which is why I put chaos magic in the second year, not the first year. So I don't want to confuse people, right? You got to kind of understand these things before you start saying, okay, what's true and what's not true. Because if you start doing that right away, it could break your brain. And
Yes.
I don't want to do that to anybody. And that's another thing. So part of the reason for this course is to help people avoid occult psychosis, which is very real. I've seen it too many times, and it upsets me. It's important to stay grounded, and this course will help you to stay grounded.
Love that. Is there any, now I'm just curious for my own personal whatever. Is there any particular topic that you are most excited to teach? Like, what's the one topic that you're like, oh, I can't wait to do this one?
Oh, definitely sigil magic,
Mm,
even though it's so simple, and it'll just be a short class. But we'll get into more complicated ways to do sigil magic and ways to incorporate sacred geometry and numerology and tarot into, really tarot also. So tarot, like you could have a deep, rich magical practice that consists of nothing but tarot.
mm.
It could be your religion essentially. Of course, I want to do more because tarot corresponds to astrology and numerology, and to magical practices. You could branch out, but tarot is so effective and so helpful. That could be all you do, and that would be fine. But I like sigil magic because it's made the biggest difference in my life, right? Because I believe in it, probably, right? Which is part of what I'll be teaching, how to believe. But it works. It works every time. It works like a charm. And you have to be specific with your sigils, right? There's some tricks to it. You could write a sigil that says, I want a Lamborghini. Are you going to get a Lamborghini tomorrow? No, it's not going to happen that way. It's almost definitely not. So I encourage people to make sigils that are more well thought out. So one of the first sigils I will have all of my students make will be based on the phrase, I am always in the right place at the right time.
Mm.
Now, making that sigil, that specific sigil, changed my life because it became true. I am always in the right place at the right time. And things always
Wow.
work out for me.
What a
I am
sneaky technique.
extraordinarily lucky.
Yes. I love that. Oh, I'm so stealing that. Thanks for that little tip. That's great.
Mhm.
Cool. So I'm excited for your school and I can't wait to hear how it goes. And again, for anybody listening, I'm going to have all of his information linked below if you're interested in the podcast, either on Spotify or YouTube, or we're going to link all your socials, right? Your Instagram, the mystery
Sure. Yeah.
school. Yeah, we'll link
Yeah.
all the things. And that was pretty much all the questions that I had for you today. I'm so glad that you were able to come on this channel. And I honestly, I was thinking it was going to be a lot more spicy than it was, but that's okay because we talked about a lot of really good stuff. So thank you for coming on the channel.
Yeah. No, my pleasure. I was stoked to be here. I love talking to you. Yeah, I'm an extremely agreeable person. It's difficult to get a spicy conversation out of me. I
I'm
know, right?
disappointed. I'm so
I know.
disappointed.
But I
Um,
do feel, however, I will say that part of paradigm shifting, if you're good at it, part of chaos magic, if you're good at it, is the ability to not be held up by your own ego. You can listen to another person's point of view and be like, yeah, you could totally be right. And I could totally be wrong. And that would be rad because being wrong is better than being right. Because when you're right, well, you're actually probably wrong. You just won't admit it. But when you know that you're wrong, you can say, cool, I'm getting a little bit closer to what's right.
yes, I totally agree. That's why I love having these conversations because I want to be checked. I want someone to prove me wrong. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm thinking right now. Tell me how I'm wrong. And I love that stuff because we're all wrong. Okay. Nobody has the right answer to literally
Yeah.
anything. So yeah, I agree. But anyways, well, thank you so much again for being on this channel. And I will see you all in another video very soon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.